Some of your impressive book collection will no doubt record how well we coped with past events, past upheavals. Does New Zealand have a good track record at dealing with trauma?
It does. The history of this country, going back to the 1918 flu epidemic, coming through to the Great Depression, the global financial crisis, 2008, 2012, in all of those, we've seen New Zealand as a small, relatively nimble country able to react to and to develop new policies that fit what has occurred and to replace what has occurred in terms of some of the negative consequences.
So you still rate us for our ability to be resilient.
I do indeed. And what we tend to see is post a major impact, a negative impact. Let's take the Wall Street crash in the late 1920s. What we see is a period of revival and reform. So in 1935, we got the Labour government, and that's the basis of much of our welfare state through the 20th century. So I think there is always a moment where you can say, yes, we need to do something different, and we need policies and politics which enable us to do that. And yes, on occasions, New Zealand has shown itself enormously resilient and able to deal with these major shocks to its system.
What are the other factors that could test social unity?
One of the things that I think we've heard a lot of is what is the new normal going to be? And we've heard this word reset. A reset does not mean going back to things as we did them prior to the pandemic. It is an opportunity for us to really consider what a 21st century New Zealand might look like and to begin to shift resources and support and policy in ways that privilege the new way of doing business, of living in this century. And it is a bit concerning to me that we are seeing a lot of arguments for returning to the old normal, not considering the new normal.
Let's look at politics then. Leadership will be critical in the years ahead. What is the role of future governments in terms of trying to maintain social cohesion?
Well, I think there are two risks in terms of political leadership. The first of those is that everything gets politicized. And I think there are issues and matters that are of common concern that we need to discuss and debate and come to a decision about without them being politicized. The second issue is that one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that we need to co-determine or co-produce some of these new policies. When we think about some of the policy innovations over recent years, some of them have been excellent, but others have not really involved the communities that are the major beneficiaries or the major partners in those policies. So couldn't we really agree that we need to make sure that some of those communities that are going to be impacted are involved in the process of producing those new policies? And if I can use one example, the baby boomers are now politically very significant in determining policy, and we're not giving enough space and airtime to some of the subsequent generations, the millennials or Gen Zs, in terms of these debates. And that's an important intergenerational tension that I think we really need to address if we're going to get policies that really create a future for our children and grandchildren.
You're sitting there in your office today. You've been very busy watching events unfold. How are you feeling? Are you feeling apprehensive, uncertain about what lies ahead, possibly even excited and invigorated by what might be about to unfold? How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling excited because I think there is a moment now when we begin to talk about our systems, our policies, and the way in which we are going to operate in the future in a way that probably we would never have had without the pandemic. So it's one of those moments in history when a crisis has asked searching questions of us as a country. Why I would get depressed is because if we move to a new environment where everything got politicized, where we didn't have these important policy debates about what's important, if we went back to the old normal, then we've lost that opportunity, and that certainly would depress me.
Maybe we could start off by asking you first, when do you expect to be able to take an overseas holiday?
Not anytime soon. I think that we're fooling ourselves if we think that mobility, particularly international mobility, is going to ease anytime soon. I think this is much, much more impactful on what we can do internationally than most people realize.
In fact, you're warning us to be ready in case it takes 2 to 4 years before migrants and tourists return. So, with that sort of wait, what does that sort of isolation do to a country?
Well, what it does is it begins to put a focus on the things that are important to us locally. So there's a great deal more emphasis on localism, on what we can do as tourists inside our own country, how our systems are going to operate. But we are a trading country and we trade on various things. I mean, I don't think people realize quite how extensive our international links are, and in particular, the way in which tourists, international students, temporary workers, permanent migrants influence this country that is New Zealand in the 21st century. At the point of lockdown, there were 310,000 people in this country on temporary work and study visas and some permanent visas. So that's an extraordinarily large group of people who are here working and studying in this country. And that doesn't even begin to account for the number of tourists who come here.
There has been a lot of talk about appreciating what we have and enjoying what New Zealand is during the reset. But is there a danger this could be overstated? Because when you're worried about your job, you're worried about health, you're worried about your family, it's not the best time to appreciate scenery in the South Island.
No, it's not. And I think we should acknowledge that some of us are much more privileged than others, that when we're talking about a pandemic, we need to acknowledge that that will exacerbate the inequalities that already exist in New Zealand. So as we come out of the pandemic, some of us are going to be able to travel to Queenstown and make up for the lost international tourists, but many of us won't be able to. And we need to acknowledge that there are very different New Zealands inside the country. There are people who will be the traditional impoverished, but there will be new groups who will be the unexpected impoverished as well. The people who, prior to this pandemic, had a job and had a future, and now both of them have gone. So we need to acknowledge the growing number of people who are going to be facing financial and other difficulties.
Isn't it extraordinary that some of those people are now queuing for food parcels in Queenstown?
Yes, I mean, we should acknowledge that this pandemic has impacted upon our New Zealand communities, but it's also impacted upon those people who are in New Zealand on these temporary visas. And I feel very, very strongly for them in terms of their situation because, you know, they are stuck here. They don't fit in terms of our requirements for benefits and work support. This has accelerated some of the changes that were already occurring, but it's also impacted very significantly on some industries, such as, in this case, the tourism and travel industries. Hospitality, I would add to that as well. So whereas you might have thought, well, in a gig economy, there are going to be some workers who are going to face precarious work in the future because machines are going to take over, we've seen a pandemic add to that degree of precariousness and really introducing into our system groups of people who are facing a very different future from what they were 3 months ago. But I think it raises a fundamental question in terms of another set of issues, which is how we reskill and match people to new industries and new employers when they've lost their job. And they've got a very good skill set. So let's not overlook that skill set. Let's use it in ways that benefit all of us.